first thing I'd say to describe it, which is something you hear from everyone but you don't necessarily believe until you're on it, is how intense it is. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because even though there's a lot of work required, it means you're completely immersed in the teaching world. You're very much in a kind of bubble with your other colleagues who are learning to teach as well. In terms of the practicality, we were teaching on the third day, which is something that I didn't kind of quite anticipate how nerve-wracking that would be. So on my course there were 15 people. We had 5 person per TP group. So TP is teaching practice, and in a TP group you kind of observe other people's lessons, you give feedback. So you have input in the mornings, which is when you're going through kind of the theory of teaching, and you get taught lessons as if you are a student, so you really get kind of immersed in what it's like to be a student as well as a teacher. And then in the afternoons you have your TP, which is your teaching practice, and then feedback afterwards, and then afternoon input as well. And I think as well, it's not just, you kind of go in and you're thinking, all I have to do is plan a lesson, but you're going over everything you learned in the day, you're working out how to incorporate your feedback into the lesson. I was very lucky with the other trainees on my course in that we were all very close. And I think in terms of advice I'd give to people on the course generally, don't be afraid to rely on other people for support, because everyone brings their different strengths and everyone has their different weaknesses, and if you kind of work collaboratively, it means you're able to get far more out of it than you would otherwise. I mean, it is just a lot of fun as well, and I'm lucky enough that I'm still in contact with about 4 or 5 trainees on the course who are all teaching in kind of different schools now, so we will still go with each other for questions like, I'm trying to teach the second conditional, does anyone have any innovative ways to kind of not make it just dull? I'd say as well as kind of being intense though, it is also enjoyable, because the fact that it's so intense means you can see your progress day by day. And that's a very satisfying experience as someone who, knows that you want to teach, but also knows that the only way to get better at it is by doing it. Well, I think I didn't really understand what the communicative approach was until I got onto the course. I didn't really know what it meant, and I had no idea how to implement it. And I think the idea of rote learning is something that, a kind of hangover from the Industrial Revolution, something that we as language learners maybe at school associated with what teaching is. They kind of stand up in front of the board, memorize these are the definitions. But actually when you work within a context, you are able to watch the learners kind of naturally progress through that language point, whether it's lexis or grammar. And being taught in my input via the communicative approach, you suddenly start to piece everything together of like, this is an efficient way of teaching, and it kind of allows you to collaborate with your students. And that's something that I, didn't necessarily expect to have so much feedback with the students kind of as you're teaching. It's not the kind of didactic, I am the teacher, you are the student. It's very much the whole class works to make a dynamic that, is the most efficient for learning. Yeah, so I found it quite hard at first to not kind of be aware of the fact that there were people watching me the whole time. I think, it's scary to teach as it is, but then to teach in front of not only your colleagues or your fellow trainees who you respect, but also your TP tutor who has years and years of experience, and you're kind of looking at yourself like, echoing was a big one for me. And echoing is where a student says something and you repeat what they're saying. And every time I did it, I was so conscious of the fact that I'd just done it. But honestly, by about the third TP, you do start getting over that, and you begin to see your tutor and your fellow trainees as kind of an integral part to the process rather than an obstacle to the process. that was one of the big things for me. The other one that I found really difficult was the phonemic alphabet. I'll admit it and say right now I still don't know all of the diphthongs. But luckily, you put the schwa in, and that's pretty much the most useful phoneme out there. But yeah, working on pronunciation is something I'm still continuing to develop. I think, and this is one you hear in learning the whole time, like, don't be afraid to ask questions. I think this kind of ties back into the fact that it's not a competition. But, the fact is you have some people on the course who've never taught before. You have some people in the course with a master's in linguistics. Even having said that, even despite the gulf of experience, there are still things that people don't know, and that may pertain to, actual theoretical information, or it may be just like a teaching strategy that you don't quite understand. For example, guided discovery took me a while to get my head around, and if I hadn't sat there and kind of asked the tutor, and poor Celia and Danny, like, at points really pressed them, like, but what is this and what does this mean? You're not going to get the most out of it. And no question is a stupid question, because the chances are that at least a third of your class will also be sat there being like, I also don't understand this. I mean, it's almost hard to separate any aspect of the CELTA from the teacher I am today, because it informed everything from the kind of way I view students, like I was saying earlier, the collaboration between teacher and students, right back to, one of the example lessons we were taught on the CELTA. I used an activity from that the other day, and said to my tutor, by the way, I nicked that activity from you. And I couldn't imagine, knowing that I had taught before the CELTA and taught in an English language context, I look back on it now and I'm like, God, that's so much less efficient than it is now. And yeah, I think it also, above everything else, taught me how to be a good colleague. Because I think the fact that you're working in such close proximity with people in a very intense and at times very emotional process, you do really learn how to manage personalities, not only inside the classroom but outside of it. And yeah, I think the CELTA is as foundational to kind of English language teaching as knowing the grammar itself.